on for a while here. I have Laura and Andre from Mayo Clinic, and as you know, guys, I never do, and I'm using the word guys, which I don't usually, y'all, right?
It's us.
Y'all, right? Like going with my gender neutral pronouns. It's interesting. It's something that we as a team talk about a lot, and we're catching each other more and more. So just busted myself. Introduce yourselves, and then we're going to dig in and talk about the such a broad range of things that y'all are doing at the Mayo Clinic.
Andre, go ahead.
All right. So my name is Andre Cohen, and I am the program director for the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity at Mayo Clinic. Love it. It's something to marvel at, working at such a value-centered organization that's actually doing just profound work. And so really excited to be a part of not only this discussion, but a part of that great organization. So Laura.
Thank you. So Laura Lee, I get the opportunity, privilege, and my honor to work with Andre and the team at Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity and at Mayo and advancing the work. I've been at Mayo for about 3.5 years, I want to say. Feels much longer, but 3.5 years. Been doing the work of diversity, inclusion, and equity, though, for nearly 20. So started my career in K-12 education, where you got into the working directly with the students in addressing the needs of the students, but also working with your teachers and your curriculum directors and your superintendents in building out multicultural curriculum, and then moved into healthcare space about 8 years after that, and really embrace the healthcare space, because I believe that when we talk about it all starts with health, right? If we can ensure that people have healthy lives and can access all those, when we talk about social determinants, all those things that we call social determinants, and remove those barriers, that people will have the most or highest possibility to achieve their highest outcomes possible. So,
yeah. Well, it's, I was thinking about this, like often we'll say in this work, oh, it's not life or death. It is. Right? It is.
In healthcare, it is. It can be. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we're seeing right now in real time unfolding the disparities that have existed. Mm-hmm. And what I appreciate, again, is the really thoughtful, broad approach that y'all are taking, and doing some really innovative things as well in this really, really important space. And I have to say, because you two know this, but my grandmother worked at Mayo Clinic for about 40 years, and my mom grew up in Rochester. And so not only are you near and dear to my heart because of the work that you're doing, but also because of the personal connection for me, and all the stories over the years, and my grandmother having doctors stay at her house from various countries as they were coming in. And so, and again, I think this year has taught us so many lessons. And when we're really looking at healthcare in particular, folks that didn't understand before now are, again, seeing in real time this play out. And so I think what's interesting about what you all are doing is you're both taking the internal, right? What are the tools, the resources, the things that you can do to create an inclusive culture? But then what can you do externally facing to make sure that people coming to Mayo Clinic are experiencing the greatest health outcomes that they can have, because you understand that diversity, the equity, creating inclusion and belonging in systems of care.
Mo, I would even say that sometimes it's not even about when people arrive here. Some people that we reach will never come to Mayo Clinic, right? But we are reaching them because we know that there are, especially with COVID, there are impacts on those particular communities that are above and beyond, and they may be getting their information from sources that may not be very credible. So we are working with communities and community organizations without even having the intention that they will come to us, right? And so when we talk about, and I know that our role really isn't quote unquote public health, but I believe that we do have a role to play when it comes to prevention.
Yep.
So,
and it's also interesting, some of the partnerships, COVID has actually launched us into some spaces that I don't think that we would have really thought about, or maybe they were on the docket and outside of my pay grade. But really thinking about like our partnerships and how do we educate restaurants, our partnerships with airlines, how do we help airlines do their job better, because it helps us do our job better, right? And so when we think about particularly the way COVID has really reframed and reshaped how the science and the data and how we apply that, we now recognize, and maybe we recognized it before, but it's much more profound to apply our science and our data and the things we know about health and disparities to fast food chains, right? Who would have thought that would have ever been a connection, that a healthcare organization and a fast food chain could have some things in common, or an airline. And so I think those things are really important too, in terms of recognizing how much we're interconnected and how that those health disparities manifest themselves in lots of ways, and how we can intervene to reduce those health disparities in non-traditional kinds of ways, because we're in a non-traditional situation, right? So
yeah, hopefully this doesn't become tradition. Right?
Who knows?
Right. And I think you bring up such an important point about, I think, the interconnectedness that we're seeing now that has always existed, but maybe we weren't seeing played out in such a profound way. So let's just talk broad, overarching approach, philosophy, sort of the framework that you all use for DEI at Mayo Clinic.
So before or after COVID?
Right. Everything got Isn't that interesting? We talk about this with the team a lot. It's like, well, here was the plan before, and here's the plan now. And then we actually created 6-week sprints because we didn't know what was coming at us. So
go ahead, Andre.
I was just going to say, a lot of it though kind of stems from two pieces, and then we can talk more about the pragmatism of these things, right? So first, we recognize that the needs of the patient come first. So that's like our overarching drive. And so the question then becomes, do we have to address race and racism? And the answer is yes, because those are blockages to making sure that the needs of the patient come first, right? The second is, really then focusing on our rich ties values. And so I won't go into our values and all that kind of stuff, but here's the essential question. Do our values support sexism? Do our values support racism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, heterosexism, lack of access for people with disabilities? And the answer unequivocally is no. And so when we start to talk about, how to be pragmatic, once we've settled on those primary objectives, we've got a team of folks who are excited to start moving. Even if we don't know exactly what to do, we recognize that we're moving in a direction that is going to be it's going to have some powerful results.
Yeah. I have to say, and Laura, before you jump in, I want to make this comment. I got to meet with y'all. I met a couple of you in person back in March, when it was, I think, the last time we all traveled. And then I had got to demo the app for the team. Mm-hmm. And that was probably back in April. And we got off that demo and I sent Laura an email that just said, what an amazing team. Because that energy that you were just talking about, Andre, I saw, and I was like, y'all are walking the talk. Like that, the way you interacted, riffed, everything about it was this just overwhelming feeling of belonging, joy, and energy about the work. And so I think, as you were saying that, I just wanted to amplify the fact that that's real. Y'all are living it in a way that I don't see many teams. I mean, it just was coming through everything, every interaction that you had during those meetings. And I've seen that since too. So,
well, thank you. Sometimes when you're on the inside, you don't often see that for yourself. And so it's good to hear that what we're trying to practice is actually being noticed outside of,
right?
yeah.
Like, helped. Yeah.
So the only thing I was going to add to what Andre is saying is that kind of from an infrastructure perspective, the office that Andre and I support and run is really looking at across the enterprise, what are some of those large, big bucket item needs, right? And then so at Mayo, we've got this 3 shields of practice, education, and research. And within each of those shields, so yeah, education, practice, and research. And within each of those shields, they also have some FTEs, so offices that are also focused on particularly the work within those shields. So in practice, for example, we have an office that's focused on the actual disparities and equity work for tracking of disparities within our house, being able to disaggregate that data, collect that data, all that fun stuff. In education, so because we have both the undergrad and the graduate school programs here, we have offices that are focused on both recruitment and retention of diverse learners, and building out curriculum. So we rolled out was it just this summer, Andre, I believe, a curriculum for year 1 and year 2 students, focused on anti-racism. And then the third shield is research. And in that we have actual, when you think about traditional research, we have an office that works on traditional research with your principal investigators and teams of investigators that look at certain particular outcomes in particular groups or communities and identify what those gaps may be, what interventions we can be doing to close those gaps, right? So there is that. And then there's the research office that's looking at the workforce within themselves. Because one of the things that office found was when we looked at industry supported research dollars, most of those dollars were actually going to men, right?
And typically white men, yeah.
Yeah. And so what can we do to address that gap from that perspective?
Yeah. And I think that's the thinking about even that approach, right? Breaking it out and then being really thoughtful and, having those pillars, shields, and then the measurement against that and the resources against that and understanding what might be different, what might work in education could be very different in practice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So really dialing in each area and being specific to each area's needs. Although it's interesting, right? You think about some things like COVID research right now, and some of the data that was coming out in terms of who were actually a part of the trials, right? And we were about to replicate some really bad, some really bad, like, okay, let's test all this on white people. Let's test all these. So I think now I'm really glad that there's this lens that is getting caught, right? And that's getting like stopped in its track, and we have to stop, and that's not going to work anymore, right? Because we've seen what those outcomes look like, and they're not good.
Yeah, and that has been not just a COVID-19 trend, right? Yep. It's been, when it comes to research and specifically trial research, it's been part of the flaws of our history, where research has been conducted on such a minute group of people or specific group of people and then applied to others, right? And Andre does a wonderful job of talking about his own personal experience in this space, but like research that was mostly done with white men does not apply to Black men and Asian men, right? Or could apply, but could apply differently or at different stages in our lives versus white men. And so I think COVID, to your point about disparities research, has amplified it. But in what we've talked about in our own conversations is all those have always been there. All those issues we know about health disparities have always been there, right? 1990s. We've known about disparities since the 1990s, but we are still doing the same stuff because we haven't done anything to address those systemic issues that are causing the outcomes that we see today. And so I think it is time for us to start to truly look at what are those systemic barriers that we need to start to undo. And I think that's what one part of and Andre can speak a little bit more about this. One of the things that we're trying to build inside of Mayo Clinic is helping people better understand and give them the tools and resources to address the systemic pieces, even using your own individual power.
Yep. And we recognize, a large part of why some of those trials, and some of that research hasn't been done is primarily due to the lack of relationships with communities, right? So, if we look back at, I think these aren't typical, but they have been consistent throughout history, right? Where things have been done to people as opposed to with people, right? Research is done on a group of people as opposed to with a group of people, where that knowledge is shared, where the learning, and so a large, there are communities that feel very resistant to this idea of being part of a clinical trial. You're not going to use me as a guinea pig, right?
Right.
One of the things we've been really trying to work on is how do we build authentic relationships with communities so that we are building this body of knowledge together. And I think that's a really tricky thing to kind of do, particularly given, some of our historic pieces. We have a hospital, we have arms in communities like Owatonna and Mankato. And so there's a history there that one must understand if one wants to be effective in those areas. And there are relationships that have to be constantly built and maintained and fostered and nurtured because of historical harms. And, one of the things we've been really trying to work on is how do we use our power to restore history to its rightful place with a proper perspective as we move forward in building things together or collaboratively. So,
right, it's like acknowledge, understand, learn from that history. And you said something I think that was really important. You said many things that are really important. I'm gonna call out one thing. That you said ongoing, right? You don't just get to say, yeah, we're fixed, Band-Aid done, boom, move on. That's so true of this work overall. We're not done. It's constant. Let's talk about some of the things that you're doing internally. What you're doing across the, and again, I'm going to make some assumptions here, might not be the same in Arizona as it is in Minnesota, right? Some of the programming, some of the approach.
So we've launched so as we were going into COVID and being asked to work remotely, our office launched what we called Everybody in Conversations back, early April. I want to say late March, early April. And every Friday we bring in participants from across the enterprise and have conversations on topics of diversity, equity, inclusion. And then the George Floyd killing happened. And quickly we pivoted and focused on our conversations on race and racism, and specifically within healthcare. And at that time, we've turned then into helping build tools and resources and helping our people have these conversations, whether it's internally or externally. And so these Everybody in Conversations we have on every Friday at 12 noon Central Time, we have over 500 people in attendance every Friday.
That's awesome.
And we thought originally in our discussion, we thought that, by the end of the year, the participation might peter off and we may have to reevaluate how we move forward in 2021. They've actually gone up. So when we first started, we had 300 something, maybe 400. Now we're looking at 500 plus. Some calls we have 580 on the call. And then, so the Everybody in Conversations, we have that. We have what Andres and the team has worked really hard on is launching what we call an Everybody in Challenge. And it's a 4-week intensive dive into 4 particular topics. Andre, you want to talk about those?
Yeah, so we talk about breaking your own bias. We talk about systemic racism and oppression. We talk about recognizing your own privilege, and then finally your own power. So those are the kind of four pillars of the challenge. And so what that provides people is an opportunity to not see yourself as a victim, but to see yourself as an actor, right? And so what we recognize is either you are, I mean, maybe I'm an absolutist or a purist, but you're either working to undo the harms that racism has caused, or you're passively active in it. And so what this challenge does is it really encourages people to get the skills. So one of the things that one of our theoretical underpinnings is that people are doing the best they can with what they have, and it will always be inadequate. Right. So we've decided to really give people tools to make them adequate for the challenges that they're facing today, recognizing that there will be challenges tomorrow that we don't know about. But if you take these principles, you can apply those and be successful in addressing those things as well. And so we all recognize at the end of the day, no matter what has happened, what we've been taught or not taught, we will be held accountable for our own actions. And so we want to give people skills and tools that will allow them to act in accordance to our organizational values, but more importantly, to act in the world in accordance to their own values. And so we spend a lot of time around skill building, less about ideology, less about how you should necessarily think about these things, but really focusing on the skills that are necessary to help us accomplish goals. One of the things that we're really focused on at Mayo Clinic is being goal focused, right? So if it's not meeting the goal, then it can be questioned. If it's not helping us to reach our outcomes, then that's where critical thought needs to be applied to that particular ideology, behavior, whatnot. So
say more about that, because it's interesting to me. If we could just unpack that a bit, because there are organizations that are like, no, we can't have goals around this. We can't measure around this. And I understand, like, in some organizational cultures, they'll do anything to hit a goal, even if it's bad, right? Right? Like, it's like, you gave us this number, or you gave us this percentage, or you gave us this thing. We're just going to drive to get that, even if it's not sustainable, right? It's sort of like short-term profits in the stock market, right? Might not be great for the long term of an organization. I'd love to hear sort of how you all, what do you measure? What are goals? What does that look like in a way that actually creates the positive behavior change that you're looking for?
So let's be clear. There are differences between quotas and goals, right?
Yes.
So we are not talking about quotas here. We're not talking about quotas. We're
Right.
talking about goals based on a baseline, right? So one of the things that we are measuring, and this goes all the way up to Dr. Gianrico Ferrugia, who's our CEO and president, and Jeff Bolton, who's our chief administrative officer. So this particular measure around top 200 leadership roles. The goal was to expand that to the diversity, both gender and racial ethnic diversity among the top 200 leadership roles, right? And so, and I can certainly go into some numbers here, but because of their commitment, and they report out these numbers and successes and progress to the board of governors and trustees on a regular basis, right? So it's not us going now to report it. It's a top two gentlemen of the house.
So it started there, and you looked at the top 200 roles, right? So you said, okay, we're going to diversify there.
Yeah.
And we're going to constantly talk about it. Right?
Correct.
Okay, great.
So looked at both the physician leadership as well as the allied, we call it allied health, so non-physician leaders, and what's the current representation in 2018. And as we think about jobs that are coming open and potential rotations that may be coming around for our physician leaders, what our opportunities may be, and then we set out goals, right? So again, it's not a quota, it's goals. And then between there, what we do is we put in programs to help build leaders and our succession pool to make sure that we have the most opportunities to meet that particular goal.
Yep.
Right. So there's a difference between quotas and goals.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yep.
And I don't have any tattoos, but like I'm pretty, like I want to get the quotas and goals. like something, that's where we run into trouble. That's when people start to say, well, are we going to lower the bar? Right? Like that horrible conversation
Exactly.
that we do have to have, right? We have to have that. Let's talk about why it's not lowering the bar, but let's absolutely throw out, if I could burn that word to the ground and never have it be used again, let's get rid of quota.
And Mo, I mean, the thing that's really interesting about just having that thought is around lowering the bar or whatever. What oftentimes we don't do is we don't ask, what is the question? What is the necessity of the bar? And so just asking that question will actually lead you to a more equitable outcome in your organization, because too often we just walk into this bar and we're like, we keep bumping our heads and we're like, oh, you got to get low. But what function does that serve? And so if you can answer that with goals and objectives and data and even quantitative analysis, you can actually augment that bar when necessary. We need standards, right? So I want to be crystal clear about that. We do not believe in reducing standards, but we do believe in asking questions about the bars that we've set, and are they actually helping us or are they hindering us from goal accomplishment? And that, I mean, I think those are some, maybe that's a little bit of wordsmithing or splitting hairs, but I think it is absolutely crucial in this work to be able to identify that as opposed to talking about we're lowering bars. Well, what purpose does that bar serve?
Right. And are the folks that are already in those roles, would they have met that bar? Right. When we talk about positive bias. So I think that whole conversation, although sometimes painful to have, is really critical. Right? Like, let's talk about the bar. Is it the right bar? Should it be monkey bars? Should it be right? Like the whole, and always making sure that you've got talent ready. There's so much talent, so much unidentified talent.
Well, at Mayo Clinic, you got almost 70,000 people that work here. You talk about unidentified talent, right? And if we put into place bars, to Andre's point, bars that restrict people and saying things like you have to have worked at Mayo Clinic for a certain number of years, you have to have been in certain leadership roles, then we start to put into place bars that only serve our purposes and doesn't get us to these diversity, equity, inclusion goals. It's actually creating inequities.
Right. And old paradigms, right? Old paradigms of what things look like. And I think that's the thing too. It's like, tear those down and take a look and explore everything. And what do you really need? Right? What's really core to this? There's an organization out of Texas, or a tech company, and they looked and said, what do we really need? And they broke it down actually into some beliefs and behaviors, right? Like curiosity. And they just about tossed out any, college degree, and they got really, really good at training different elements of jobs, right?
Yeah.
They're this wildly diverse organization. Let's flip to the other side, because we've talked about some of the systems things, right? The diversity and equity that happens at leadership, at the system level. Let's talk about inclusion and belonging, which happens, right, between every single employee and every single interaction. What are you all doing when it comes to that? I think your Friday series is certainly a part of that. What are some other things?
Go ahead, Andre.
Yeah. So one of the things that so I was nervous about this, and the Lord can,
because I'm so hardcore coming at you.
That's about this, but we did something. We started on a journey to have and I don't even know if we officially have a title yet, Laura, do we? But like a Whiteness Academy. And so I'm nervous because we're in this political environment. So how do you talk about whiteness? Why is it important to talk about whiteness? How do we not alienate our white colleagues? And so we've been working with Dr. Mary R. Ferguson out of St. Louis, who has really been walking us through this absolutely brilliant and beautiful dialogue that is actually I thought it was going to, divide us. It actually has brought us closer together, not only just in what she has given us as a tool is radical compassion.
Mm.
And that the recognition that whatever we came from is not our fault, but where we are is our responsibility. And so really helping us to use this radical compassion to dispel some of these things that I refer to as obstacle illusions.
I love that. I love that.
Years between human relationships, right?
Yeah.
And so really trying to dispel those. And so we had a series on being Black in America. Right now we're kind of on this white in America kind of thing, and recognizing that there are more people. It's not just a black and white thing, but there are folks in there. But that's the dominant dichotomy that we oftentimes find ourselves in. And so we've been doing that. We've been and here's the thing that's really interesting. And I'll stop talking, Laura, so you can get in. But I think, Laura, I think the number is over 300 people that we use as outreach. I think that's about the number, but we've been teaching people how to have these same conversations. So it's not just our team. Now it's in the body of Mayo Clinic, and it's becoming a practice that people are doing in their smaller groups and in their under their shields and in their sites and in their regions. And so I think that's important. This notion of, kind of radical compassion, but also recognizing with great power comes great responsibility. I think that's Ben Parker from Spider-Man. But combine those things, it certainly becomes easier to have these tough and difficult conversations. And, and when you support that with data and science and statistics, that really helps us to fuel that. So
I would add that our leaders really jumped in even in the beginning. So George Floyd killing happened. Our leader came back as leaders, not just one, leaders across the organization said, we've got to do something about this, right? And so what we gave them was, here's a tool where you can go and host your own listening sessions, right? We coached them through it. We took them through it. We sat down and advised in certain instances. And for example, in the health system, we had Dr. Mary Jo Gostow, who leads all of our health system. So Southern Minnesota, Western Wisconsin, the community hospitals, community health clinics and whatnot. And they have by themselves about 6,000 employees roughly. She went out and hosted a virtual Zoom conversation and had over 650 of her colleagues join to talk about the impact of the social unrest and racism in the community, what makes it hard for us to have these conversations at Mayo Clinic, and what can we do about it to move forward collectively together, right? So we're hearing it or they are hearing in that instance, hearing it directly from their top of their house leader, that this is an important issue to me. Yeah. So what she's done after that is tasked all her region leaders to go and host 2 to 3 other conversations deeper into the organization, right? So we see this happening across the organization, that leaders are taking it up. We're just providing them the tools to have these conversations at the one-on-one or the group or the staff level. The tools Andre certainly talked about with the everybody in challenge, the whiteness, the being Black in America, all those tools also, we often talk about that this work it doesn't end when you clock out, right?
Right.
This is about who we are as people, even outside of the quote unquote work world. And so these tools and skills are always can be applied to anywhere you walk.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
again, Laura hit on something that I think is important: skills and tools, not ideologies.
Correct.
Because ideologies limit our ability to be effective. They certainly fuel our emotions, or maybe even our intellect. But at the end of the day, I need folks to be able to be effective with tools and resources. Those are things I can teach tools, and I can provide resources. But when we start talking about ideologies and all those things, those become really subjective and really hard to manage in an organization. So that's why we've been really focusing on tools, teleology, focused on goals. Let's do those things.
Well, right. We always talk about practical, actionable, right? Give me something that I can actually do and change behavior, and something to like hang my hat on, so that then I can practice and get better, right? And stay in motion with it. Ideology, I can do a lot of talking. Right? It's like,
and let's be honest, ideology is what we got us in trouble in this space in the beginning.
yeah. So no, we could talk forever, and I know that you have busy days, and I so appreciate this. I want to unpack like a million other things. I knew it was going to go like this. I leave me with one last truth bomb.
Ooh, I don't know. Andre, you got anything off the top of your head?
The only thing I would say is, and this is one of our themes of our conversations, is to give people space to make mistakes and give them grace when they do, because it's easier for you to do the same thing for yourself when you do it for other people.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Or you want to follow that up?
No, I don't think that it needs any follow up. So that's what we do in our everyday any conversations. Is if Andre closes it, well, I'm gonna shut up and do it.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate, we covered so much ground, and your sharing will help some other folks move forward and stay in motion, and out there doing the everyday inclusion and belonging work that needs to be done. So we'll see you all next week. And thanks, Laura and Andre.
Thanks for having me.